Bruce, who were your biggest comedy influences or idols growing up?
Oh wow! Well, I like the fat guys. You know, Jackie Gleason. I loved him. Zero Mostel, and then of course I liked all those theatrical women who, like Tula Bankhead, who was really, really funny, and who I got to work with as a teenager in a show called Murder on the Rocks. Don't even. That's a Civil War melodrama. She wore hoop skirts, and she was drunk all the time. But when she wasn't, she was fabulous and brittle and wonderful. So all of those, and Mae West, who I also got to work with late in her life, and who was more interested in real estate than anything else.
Huh.
I mean, and she was very rich from real estate. Huh. Go no. And I don't mean like guys, hunks. I like that real estate. But she said to me once, are you making a living? She really talked like that. I said, yeah. She said, do what I did, buy the Valley. And I thought she was joking, but she said, no, she said, Crosby, Hope, McMurray, and I bought the Valley. And I've been selling it off lot by lot.
Did you take her advice?
No. Our joke was...
You weren't making that much of a living.
No. The joke we always had was, what's the difference between a syphilis and a one-bedroom condo in the Valley? Well, you can get rid of syphilis.
Steven, same question. Big idols and
Yeah,
heroes?
I think it's the women. Women are underappreciated in the arena of comedy. But Carol Burnett, Julie Andrews, even Bette Midler, certainly, Terry Garr, Goldie Hawn. Women like that. It was my mother actually who turned me on to these women and would force me to watch these movies, which I didn't really want to. I had no reason why I would be enchanted by a singing nun coming to take care of 7 orphan children. And she practically had to tie me to a chair to get me to watch it. But once I did, I was absolutely enchanted by the idea of that, and I just wanted a funny woman to just drop into my life.
When you guys think about your individual takes on comedy, whether in the different forms of writing that you each do, have you worked hard to develop it and evolve it, or does it come very naturally, your sensibility and the kind of humor that you do?
I think for anybody who writes comedy, it's something that they do. I mean, they have a way of looking at the world, and if they're really neurotic, they have to perform. And they're the kids from like me who were at the Thanksgiving dancing and all of that. But if it's a thought, it's the comic thought that comes out. I mean, I don't imagine that Eugene O'Neill was a very lighthearted person. He wasn't. I mean, his one comedy is Our Wilderness, which is kind of like, I'll see if I can write something funny, and it winds up being winsome and charming, but not really what you would call funny. So I think there's a certain kind of people that do it, but the kind of stuff I write for a lot of different people for award shows and for comedians for their performances. So I have to actually write for that specific thing. And I use as an analogy Bob Mackie, the great designer, who would not put Cher in the same dress he would put Lizzo. I mean, these are two different body types. Now, he may put them in a style that is his style, but he has to write specifically to their, who will look good in an A-line, who will look good who can wear a mermaid, me, you look great in an A-line. Anyway, that's kind of like, you tailor it to who the person is, but that's just my speciality.
How about you, Steven, over the course of, how many novels is it that you've done?
5 published, several in a drawer that should stay there. Writing comedy in a novel format is different, and I don't recommend it for anyone who grew up with performing ambitions too, because it's a terrible return on investment, right? I'm sitting there typing at my desk, and I think I've got a great joke, and I turn around and realize, oh, it's going to take me another year to finish this book, and by the time it might be 2 years before it hits the shelves, and then, oh, by the way, I won't even be in the room if it gets a laugh, unless I'm peering through the windows, which I'm not above doing. So that's difficult. But what's interesting, I think the overlap here is too, when you're also writing comedy in a novel format, you're joking as characters, it can't always be your comedic voice. You have to tailor it to the character. There are times when I think I have a great joke, but I know the character that I'm writing would never say that, and so it's like that's the discipline to know. When it works and when it doesn't. But I imagine that's very similar when you're writing for someone.
I admire people. I mean, I've written a bunch of scripts that haven't been made for every reason imaginable. But when you're writing a script, you are inventing the character, and you have to write it in the voice. I write more often for people who have established voices that I can write to. I always say when Bette Midler gets on stage, she knows who she is. Yeah. When Billy Crystal gets on stage, he knows who he is. When Shirley MacLaine gets on stage, she knows who she is. She knows who she was.
And maybe again one day.
And who she will be. Yeah. So it's a slam dunk, no matter what you do.
So, Steven, your most recent book, The Guncle Abroad, which is the sequel to The Guncle, the lead character, Patrick O'Hara, has a great witty sense of humor. Is he a version of you in that regard? Is he funnier than you? How would you compare?
Well, he's definitely not funnier than me.
He's pretty funny.
Because I write all his jokes. I've been touring with these books now since the first one came out in 2021. People call me Patrick, although I think they just assume I'm Patrick. Patrick is a few years younger than I am, and he's a character who has been on television, so better looking than I am. And he's also sadder than I am. But the sad clown is not somebody that I invented, certainly. But I do think that there is a lot of crossover. Certainly our sense of humor, I think, is very similar. Our politics are the same. Our pop cultural references are very similar, and our sense of empathy is also very similar. And I think that comes also from growing up feeling like an outsider. Empathy was a sense that was developed alongside my comedy. I think there are many people, and I don't want to bash anyone here in the room, but they're usually straight men who think that it's impossible to be funny now in politically correct times. And I vehemently disagree with that. And I think, those who think you can't be funny anymore, I think we're mistaking cruelty for humor in the first place. And that's, Patrick's can be a bit of a mess, but hopefully, ultimately, there's a kindness to the humor also.
Well, in your writing, I'm thinking of Lily and the Octopus, which is a beautiful story about grief, about the relationship between a man and his dog. And then even in The Guncle, there's grief because there's a character that has passed. Is it easy or harder to add comedy when so much of the story has grief at its center? Do you have to work hard at that, or does it come naturally?
But these are the stories I grew up loving, right? So, Terms of Endearment, the movie, the Larry McMurtry novel is very different, but Steel Magnolias, Beaches. I was like, oh, these are my favorite comedies. And somebody said, oh, you mean the movie where the daughter dies and the best friend dies and the mother dies, or whomever. But I was like, oh, it was the comedy from those movies that really stuck with me. And I do think that I do write a lot about about grief, and sometimes I just think it pairs so well with humor, because that's been, for me, my entire life, the way through. That's how we survive.
Bruce, you have a new book coming out next month.
Yes.
It's called It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time,
True.
Which I love. And it's a series of essay short chapters, each about a dubious entertainment event that you worked on, whether it's
the Star Wars holiday special.
Yes, right. Or Can't Stop the Music, the movie from the early
Village
80s,
People
or some Oscar telecast that you worked on that didn't.
Rob Lowe's Snow White, my first of 25 Oscar telecasts, but that was the beginning. That was.
What was your process of jogging your memory for these things that happened decades ago?
I didn't have to jog it. It had headlights all the time, especially since keyboard warfare, which is what I tenderly call social media, has taken all of these things up. It started, during COVID, when I was on a lot of podcasts, because they exploded during COVID, because we could all sit with no pants watching, ourselves on our computers. And these kids who were like 30 years younger than I am would ask me about these television shows I wrote in the 70s that I thought were dead and buried, but in fact had all been mined by YouTube. And they were watching them all, and they all wanted to know, how did this happen? Who said yes to this? And have they paid their debt to society? And it was the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is why I wore the shirt, is the most preeminent of them. But the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, the Paul Lynde Halloween Special, I mean, there's a litany. And
It's almost like a game of Mad Libs.
And then I extended it to the movies like Can't Stop the Music, and I had a couple of Broadway flops, and a couple of things that never happened, pilots for things that never happened. But they started all as bad ideas, basically, and just nobody recognized it. So I called the book, it seemed like a bad idea at the time. And it really is, Nathan Lane said, this takes Schadenfreude to a new height.
What came particularly easy or hard in the writing of this?
Well, I didn't want to. I was very, very fortunate. Many of my collaborators are dead.
Oh.
What can I say? You know what I mean. I didn't want
Another
to
great title, by the way.
Yeah,
If there's a second book.
Well, that was what Shelley Winters. Her book was full of people she slept with.
Yeah.
And I said she said, "What did you think of the book?" I said, "I think you should call it Fuck Shelley and Die." And she said, "Very funny."
This is a library.
She had weight. She could give you a haymaker. You didn't mess around with Shelley. But what was the question?
Well, what came more easily? What came more difficult when you were putting this?
I didn't want to knock people who were alive and who would feel they had to defend themselves.
Right.
But fortunately, a lot of them were not. And so I could kind of carry on about them, but I'm not unkind to anybody. We all make mistakes, and we were all in that lifeboat on the Titanic together. So it's not, I didn't want it to be a thing like, this one is, now it can be revealed so-and-so is a putz.
Right.
I didn't want to do that. So that was the hard part, because some of them really were impossible people. Paul Lynde on 2 drinks was like the Nazi high command. Oh my God, he didn't like me. You mucky low-life gang. He didn't like Jews. He didn't like gay people. He was a gay person. He wasn't Jewish, but everybody around him was Jewish.
Right.
And I kept saying, Paul, get with the program. These people are saving your life. They're making you rich. And he didn't see it that way. But that was on 2 drinks. On 1 drink, he was charming and funny and glib and did many, many wonderful ad-libs. But on no drinks, he was sullen and miserable. He was a fundamentally unhappy person. Because he wanted to be a big movie star like the people he came up with on Broadway, Woody Allen and Mel Brooks. And I said, well, they wrote their own material. And he was a writer, but he couldn't write that stuff for him because he had to recognize that he wasn't a lead. He was a flavor. His biggest success was coming in and doing a zinger on Hollywood Squares. 1 joke and off. And in the movies, he was like, Doris Day's friend. Those characters. It was hard for that kind of a character to carry a story. Unlike Woody and Mel, who wrote things for themselves, and they were kind of, Woody was a nebbish, and so you were automatically kind of sympathetic to him. And Mel was just outrageous, whatever he was doing, and he could pull all of that off. And Paul only did that thing, that thing that 45 years later, he's been dead, we're still talking about it. Because that one thing was so wonderful.
Stephen, you touched on this a few minutes ago, but how would you articulate the value of humor and comedy in a time like now when the world is in disarray?
Yeah, I get that a lot from my, whenever I pitch a new book, to my editor, my agent, the first question I get is, well, will it be funny? It's going to be funny, right? It'll be funny? It'll be funny? And I don't always feel so funny right now, and the world doesn't feel so funny right now. But when you stop and think about it, humor like many other things, is a tool. You know, it's what do you want to use humor to say? And so I think, you know, even in times like now, there's plenty to say. And so I think about how can I use humor. You know, sometimes, you know, in writing the Gunkel books, which are very sort of a modern day Auntie Mame or a Mary Poppins, you know, the humor sometimes I think about it as like the spoonful of medicine. I mean, the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. Now, everyone needs a spoonful of medicine right now. You've all had too much sugar. No, it is that spoonful of sugar, I think. And so when I'm not feeling particularly funny in the morning, I just think about what it is I really am trying to say with a novel, and let the humor follow. I can't sort of lead with the humor, but I also think that's why a lot of grief or serious issues also make their way into my books. I was, you know, inspired. Is it the Dolly Parton character in Steel Magnolias? Who says laughing through tears is my favorite emotion?
I don't
Dolly.
remember.
I think it's Dolly.
Dolly.
We have,
Yeah,
we have
Dolly's
some
character.
Steel Magnolias experts in
Yeah.
the audience.
The Robert Harling fans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I very much agree with that. We need a good word for it, though. Laughter and crying and laughing, because lying is already a word. Crafter sounds terrible. So I'll get to work on that. But yeah, I think I was think about what do I want to say with humor and with a joke.
And Bruce, same question to you. Why the importance of humor, the importance of comedy right now?
Oh, I think we would die without it. I mean, all those people I talked about died with it, but I think we would. Absolutely. I mean, when the times get rough, I mean, you know, I met Holocaust survivors who would tell me jokes that they told in the camps because they said nobody wants to hear this, but there are jokes, and they would share them with me, and I would share them with you, but you would be outraged. So, but even then. When there's nothing but darkness around you, you have to find some kind of light, and it's just something ridiculous. It's like, I don't know, you finally get something you wanted and you drop it in the mud. You know, and you can kind of go, oh, my life is over. You can go, sure,
Yeah.
my mazel, I dropped it. Yeah, and that begins a lightening of the situation. So I think that's the only way you can really treat it.
So Steven, you just said it's hard to feel funny right now. I mean, I remember when I worked at Entertainment Weekly, I did a phone interview once with Robin Williams. So it was just he was on the phone. I was a one-man audience, and it was as if he was on the stage at Carnegie Hall doing a comedy show. It was everything out of his mouth was so damn funny I couldn't stand it. And I listened to the tape so often because it just made me laugh so hard. But I just got the sense that was just him. I didn't get the sense that it was a faucet that he was turning on necessarily just for me, although maybe he was. How is it for you guys? You just said you don't feel funny sometimes. Is it something you feel like you can turn on and off, or does it sometimes arrive and sometimes it doesn't?
I don't know. I wonder if there's like a sort of, I think about a queer sensibility to this too, because, you know, growing up at a time, or for anyone who lived through the AIDS crisis in particular, you know, there were people who were activists in the morning, and they would bury their friends in the afternoon. And at night, they would laugh, or they would dance, or they would, you know, life continues in that way. And it is the laughter, as Bruce says, it's the reason. It's how, not only how we survive, but sometimes I think the reason for living, like sharing a laugh with someone is, you know, truly one of life's great joys, I think. And so, you know, like Donald Trump, can I turn a spigot in Northern California and bring all the laughs down to Southern California? I don't know, but the laughter usually finds me.
You know, I mean, it's from birth. I mean, a friend of mine just had a baby, and it's like he's 4 months old, and I go over and I play with this kid, and he laughs.
Yeah, I didn't know babies could laugh until I had a nephew.
They don't at the beginning, but after like the third or fourth month, when they recognize you and you do something funny, they begin laughing. And I think, well, what is that coming from? It's involuntary. And the laugh itself, the physical laugh, is obviously something that the body is programmed when a certain thing happens that releases a certain endorphin that makes the baby laugh physically. And so I thought, well, okay, it's in there, it's biological, it's us. Why deny it?
Yeah.
Just go with it. That will keep happening.
Do you guys have examples of experiences you've had, whether it's in a writer's room or with a particular reader or an editor, where someone just didn't get you? Didn't get your humor? And if so, how did you? How did you deal with it?
I just read my 1-star reviews on Goodreads.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if I ever think, God, I'm really funny, I have an award. If I'm ever feeling too high on myself, I'll just read, you know, some of those. But yeah, the humor is subjective. There are plenty of people who don't get us, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, I walk in the room and they kind of go, "Oh, you're a comedy writer," because I'm either that or I'm Travis Kelce's mother. Resemblance is alarming, is it not?
Yeah. I feel like
a year ago, people at the Super Bowl, they started calling me because I was waiting for the halftime show, and they were calling and saying, "Dude, what are you doing at the Super Bowl with Taylor Swift?" And I turned it on, and there was Donna Kelce, and I thought, holy shit, my doppelganger. Chubby, blonde, red glasses. What can I... And so I hope they stay together because I want to ride that joke
Exactly.
as long as I possibly can.
I feel like I'm in the Clark Kent version of comedy writer today. Like I'll have my pop culture T-shirt under, you know, I just need to rip this
You
up.
spring out.
Yeah, exactly.
Get me a phone booth. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There are no more phone booths.
No more phone
Where
booths.
does he change now? He has to join a club or something.
Right.
But I want to drill down on this, Bruce. So what happens when you're in like a writer's room at an award show or and you're just not vibing with someone?
I mean, the kind of writing I do, the eccentricity and flamboyance have always kind of been encouraged, so it's not like crazy. But sometimes they'll just think something is. They won't just say I don't get it. It's generally because it's either too hip. It's about something that they don't really know, so they kind of dismiss it, you know. And then you just. It's about your audience, basically, more than anything else. It's like, oh, I see, I'm dealing with these guys, you know. And but a few times I've heard from an agent who always spoke truth to me. She would say, they don't like gay people. They don't want, or they don't like, you know, it's funny to hear somebody say they don't need any more Jews in the room. Because in variety television, the room is a lot of Jewish writers. And they don't want more Jews, or they think you're a little light in the loafer. My favorite thing, like I never could fit into a loafer. I mean,
A little light in the Crocs.
yeah. And I thought I don't want to work for those people. I don't want to work with anybody who doesn't, you know, who doesn't want me around. So there was Merle Miller, who was a gay historian who was gay, and among one of my favorite quotes of his was. A faggot is a homosexual gentleman who has just left the room. And I thought, well, I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be the homosexual gentleman who left the room. I'm going to let them know ahead of time. When you say faggot, you're talking about me. Me, who's across the desk from you, making more money than you are, and writing stuff. So that became my maxim in life. And fortunately, I'm in an occupation where that can be enabled. I mean, the really brave people were the cost accountants working for insurance firms who had to bring a fake wife to the picnic, that kind of thing. They didn't have the option that I had. So I'm lucky that way.
What would you guys say is the least gay thing about your writing or your sense of humor?
Oh, God, yeah.
Donnie and Marie.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you look at it, I guess.
Well, you did say earlier that you thought a soccer practice was called the rehearsal, so there's not much that's not gay.
Yeah, there's not much that's not gay. Yeah. That's a good question. I'm gonna
ruminate?
think on that. Yeah.
I wrote the Brady Bunch, and there's nothing gay about the Brady Bunch except
Robert Reed,
Robert Reed, who was very, very closeted, and for two reasons actually. One was that he was a serious leading man actor, and he knew it would trash his career if it came out that he was gay. But his other reason was this was like the third iteration of the Brady Bunch, and of course he'd been on board with the first. When he did the first version, the sitcom, they were really kids. When we did our version, they were teenagers, and some of them were coming into majority as we did the show. But he had been their surrogate father throughout all of these iterations. A lot of them had parents who viewed the kids as revenue streams and were hostile to anything that didn't profit them, no matter what it did to the kid. And he took up the cudgels for the kids. And he felt that if, at this point in 1977, if he were to come out, it would be a kind of a betrayal, and he would immediately be classified as some kind of pedophile. And so he said, I just can't let that happen to the kids. Because he really did, he really, it's hard to believe, but you know, when you're in the trenches of people, even doing a thing like a television show, you get very close. Very long hours, lots of work, lots of family shows up, and you get that family connection. So he was one of the people who I absolutely understood, keeping himself in the closet.
But the irony of that, wasn't it Florence Henderson and Barry Williams that were having a flirtation?
Well, Barry thinks he was.
Yeah.
He liked to pretend he was chasing after Florence, and she always thought it was hilarious. But she was married to a guy, Ira Bernstein, who ran the Schubert Theater chain, and they had 4 kids, and she adored him, and they were a fabulous couple. And the idea of her actually having one off with the kid who played her son. Yeah, Florence was very hip. Florence was not Carol Brady. She was Broadway, Vegas. She was really a sharp cookie and bawdy and would tell a dirty joke just to alarm people because she wanted them to know she was not that character. But I think she would have drawn the line.
Yeah.
I mean, when he put that in the book, I said, how did I miss that? I was there every day. How did I miss that?
You know, I asked you guys earlier about people who were your comedy idols and influences growing up. I'm curious when you think about people who are doing different forms of comedy today, and there's so many different kinds. There's people who perform stand-up. There's people who write one-liners for other people, essayists, novelists. There's so many different ways to be funny. Is there a form of comedy that you wish you could do, or is there someone out there doing a type of comedy that you really admire right now that might be different from what you're doing?
Yeah, when I was young, I always say I wanted to be like a monologuist. I don't know why. I thought that sounded great. I wanted to be like Spalding Gray or somebody. And I just think that's a very, sort of unique skill. But I guess novel writing sort of feeds that. It is because it's a very sort of solitary endeavor as opposed to like writing in a TV room or for a show where you've got other people to bounce it on. And sometimes it's so desperately lonely. I wish I was in a room.
That's what my manager always said to me when I said, I really want to write a novel. She said, no, you're not a novelist.
Yeah.
You're too social. And I'm a collaborative writer. I'm in rooms a lot. But there's a time where you are always facing the blank page or probably the blank screen now. But so it just, I would love to do it.
Yeah. I would love, I don't remember the name of the show offhand. Maybe someone here knows that Alex Edelstein did on Broadway last year.
Oh,
Do you know what I'm
yeah.
talking about?
Not just for us. It was something.
Yeah,
Just, yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I thought I'd be Neil Simon. I wanted to write one
Yeah.
hot play after another. That didn't happen. I thought I'd be like a screenwriter, and that didn't happen. Yeah, they bought things, but they didn't get made because stars died, studios crumbled, and all the usual reasons. But so I finally said, my agent said to me, you are your art. You are a piece of performance art all by yourself.
Yeah.
Just let go of all that shit and get on with it.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, she said it in a very Katharine Hepburn voice, just let go of yourself and get on. I found that inspirational. So that's what I did.
Another question for the two of you, Bruce, you could take it first. When you think of all the different things that you've done, is there one part of your career, one job, or one part of a job that you had where you felt particularly proud of what you were able to pull off? Maybe I'm thinking back to when Billy Crystal was hosting the Oscars and Jack Palance did the push-up, and you had to come up with all of those lines on the spot.
Yeah, all of that stuff, the Academy Awards I wrote, the 25 of them I wrote, we won 2 Emmys for 2 of the Billy years. I think of that, and I met Bette Midler 50 years ago and have been writing for her ever since. All of her stage work, and I come in and Midlerize the movies, so look for Hocus Pocus 3.
Okay.
In the hopper as we speak. I mean, where the witch's brew is being stirred. So that is, she was the first person, actually the first person I wrote for was Palm Springs legend Kay Ballard.
Oh, sure.
She was the first person I wrote for. I was a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. I interviewed her and she said, write for me. And, she was like Shelley. You didn't mess with her. So I wrote for her, and then I met Bette shortly thereafter and began writing for her, and I've been writing for her ever since. So I was in on the ground floor of that, and it got me to everything else. So she is my muse.
Dave, that was you weren't pitching jokes to Robin Williams. You could have had a whole other career.
I know, right?
Robin, I worked for Robin for a long time. With Robin, I would say I would write material and throw it in the cage, and then we would sit down and go over it. And then every night he would get up and he would do stuff, but he would do new stuff. There was all day. You didn't know what was new and what was embroidery and what was from the original tapestry. But that was his genius, is that every night he got up and came up with something. People say he's so spontaneous, and I would say, yes, he is the first time. But, I mean, I wasn't the only one to work with. There were a couple of other guys. Bennett Tramer was another guy who worked with him. And we just kept, we just kept doing it. I mean, he's one of a kind. His mentor was Jonathan Winters.
Right.
And so they were two of a kind. They could do anything on the spot and at high speed and dazzle you because they were being funny and athletic at the same time, comedically athletic. So,
what about you when you think of your books or anything else? Is there one that was the kind of biggest mountain to climb that you feel most proud of?
Well, in high school I had a job at the Humpty Dumpty potato chip factory. And I went right up to the CEO's office and I was like, you can't name your potato company after an egg. And I got them to think. No, that's not really. If you've heard me interviewed before, you've heard me say, the books that were available, the sort of queer literature that was available to us when we were young or first coming out was, often written about lives lived in the shadows, lives, sad, lonely existences, and lives cut short. And I've been very fortunate to live in a time where society has changed enough that there is great joy. And life has been the opposite of lonely for me. And so to write these books now, sort of queer books that doesn't ignore the hardships of life, but also can include the joy and the laughter, I think, particularly available for young kids who are not sure what the future looks like. I'm so happy to leave something behind that celebrates the full spectrum of
I love that.
emotion.
I can't think of a better time to say, I'm sure you all have questions for these two, so please don't be shy. I see glasses in the back, yes.
Art is a parallel. If Europe or around the world, we compare yourself to a comedian that we either know or we just don't know.
Question is whether there are people in Europe or around the world that we may or may not be familiar with that you two would compare yourselves to. Who's doing what you do in other parts of the world?
wow. Well, I'm sure there are. I can't think of it.
Let's find them.
I mean, in England, I always have collaborators in England, but I'm not sure who's...
Yeah, I'm not sure either. There's certainly other writers who I read who I greatly admire, and it's usually someone who's finding comedy from within a community, another marginalized community. And so there's a great book that I read last year that just came out in paperback, right now, Come and Get It by Kylie Reed, about sort of the black experience on young women, the black experience on Southern college campuses, which was great. I'm reading Sandwich right now by Catherine Newman, who is about a woman going through menopause in a way, and yet I am relating to her in such an interesting way because, you get to a certain age, my body's changing too, and I'm not, but it's usually people who are writing so authentically from a very specific point of view that even though it's not my experience, I really sort of latch onto and admire the work.
That's great. Yes, sir.
Is there anything in which you absolutely cannot find comedic material?
Like any topic or any sphere in which you can't find any comedic material.
No, it's that was I used to write for George Carlin, and he used to do a routine about they said rape, and he did a routine about rape, and it was about a guy who raped an old lady, and it was edgy, it was crazy and funny, but and I'm sure distasteful. But the idea was, this guy was turned on by this old lady. This was where he found the humor, and that she wouldn't yield. He found a bunch of ways to make it funny. He didn't do it a whole lot, but I suppose that's right up there with all those kinds of awful things.
Right, and I doubt that would fly today.
You don't really mind for the humor. It's gallows humor, It's if anything, or what they used to call black humor.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's who can tell a joke and who can't. I mean, I think I was 14. I was a freshman in high school, I think, when the Challenger space shuttle exploded, and watching that in school. And immediately we came up with Challenger jokes were my favorite jokes as a 14 or 15-year-old. And they're like, oh, you can't. And my mother would tell me, you cannot repeat those. You cannot say those. And to this day, they make me laugh. But it's because you're so traumatized by something in the moment that how are you going to tell a 14-year-old kid that you're not allowed to make a joke? Because sometimes that is just what sets you at ease a little bit about the horror that you have just seen. And so I don't ever want to say anything's off the table. It's always in the execution and how you do it.
What I think is hilarious is that people that don't think they're funny. I mean, nobody in the world was funnier than Richard Nixon. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, to me, he was the highest camp. He was veiled seriousness. Anything, he'd come out and he would say, I'm not a crook. And you go, you are such a crook. Him doing it was hilarious. And I thought, and he never failed. He just one after another. Just crazy.
Even his final lunch, the cottage cheese and pineapple,
That's
like the canned pineapple slice. Yeah.
Yes.
How does the nature of your comedy change with the need to be politically correct?
How has the nature of their comedy changed with the need to be politically correct these days?
Well, it's very difficult because you're walking on landmines. I'm a member of at least two minorities, and so when they come after my minority, I get squeamish. But if it's not mean-spirited, it's okay. I mean, but it certainly has to be, and I understand that Me Too and George Floyd and woke, all of that, gave people who had always felt marginalized or not heard or not believed a chance to be legitimate. Their action to cancel anybody who dared question them was, what I think, inappropriate, but I got where that was coming from. But I think that there was enough pushback on that, and I think that we're coming out of that and going into some new thing. I don't quite know exactly what it is, but it's still, if it doesn't come from a mean-spirited place, if it comes from an observational, isn't that ridiculous place, it's easier to do, but it's harder. You used to be able to just do that stuff. You look at those old Bob Hope TV shows, and it's like, lots of cringing. I mean, the Jane Mansfield tit jokes. I mean, endless. He used to call me Mansfield, because he said, "Hey Mansfield, look at the boobs on you." It's just, they're both dead, so I could do that.
Yeah. I wish we would give readers and viewers a little more credit for being able to consume something with the context of the time in which it was created, right? There are probably jokes from my first book 10 years ago that I wouldn't make today. I cut a joke from The Guncle Abroad. It was like a Philistine Palestine, sort of, and I was like, and October 7th had just happened at the time, and I was like, okay, I already know this won't age. But I was, as I mentioned, very inspired by the Patrick Dennis anti-MAME books from the 1950s, and I read them and consume them with such joy. But there's a lot of things in there that we wouldn't say today, but that doesn't mean that he was an awful person. It just means it was a product of its time. And so, I think you do your best. You have to have confidence in your voice, and then hope that it will be viewed within the context of when it was written, especially for a book which will be on the shelf for hopefully a very long time.
As ours are.
As culture and culture changing alongside it.
I want to tell you this was as fun and fascinating as I hoped it would be. So Bruce Vilanch, Steven Rowley, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hope you all had a great day. Thanks a lot for being here.